Have you ever wondered what it really takes to make Agile work? Well, at the Global Agile Summit, we're bringing you real-life, first-person stories of Agile succeeding out there in the real world that will inspire you to take action. Whether you're a leader, a product innovator, a developer, you'll hear practical insights from those who've done it. They'll be telling their own stories from the stage. I'll tell you more about this at the end of this episode, so stay back and listen to the full detailed description of what we have in store for you at the Global Agile Summit. But if you can't wait, you can go right now to globalagilesummit.com and check out our full schedule. For now, on to the episode, but I'll see you at the end of this episode with more details on the Global Agile Summit. Talk to you soon. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this very special bonus episode. For this bonus episode, we have with us Kent McDonald. Hey, Kent. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. How's it going?
It's a pleasure to have you. We're going to talk with Kent about why backlogs get too big and what to do about it. Kent has decades of experience in software product development. He's a go-to expert in product management and agile strategy. Also a seasoned consultant and author of 3 books on agility. He helps teams cut through clutter to focus on what truly matters. And when not optimizing workflows, he's been exploring national parks in the US. That's 52 out of 63. That's quite a respectable score there. Or grooving to some jazz tunes. So, Kent, we're going to talk about backlogs and why they get too big and what we can do about it. This started because I saw a post from you on Substack, and we'll put Kent's Substack link also on the show notes. When you think about it from your experience, the work that you've done, what are some of the key reasons why our backlogs end up becoming too big and hard to manage?
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons for it. One of them is that a lot of teams have built up this work avoidance mechanism so that when one of their stakeholders or customers or something comes with a suggestion, they'll try and placate them by saying, oh, we'll put that on the backlog. Basically, it's just a means of saying, you know what, yeah, we'll get to it. And then they never do because they never had any intention of getting to it anyway. So that's kind of the cynical perspective as far as why backlogs explode. The other thing is that is the case of actually diving in and splitting up bigger chunks down too soon, where there's this, and often that is a result of the team feeling that they need to know a little bit more about an item in order to size it. So if they're being asked how long is something going to take, and their usual approach to sizing things is get them kind of formed into user stories and then having a planning poker session, the team will go and do that. And then they find out they're not going to be working on that for a few weeks, months, hopefully not years, but sometimes that even happens. And then the other thing is the backlog becomes the dumping ground, not only for stuff they get from stakeholders, but also the ideas the team themselves have is that they'll be sitting there chatting and someone says, oh, we got to do this. So yes, I'll put it on the backlog. And then again, it just kind of sits there and festers waiting for more action to happen with it.
Now, of course, we brought you to this episode, of course, to talk about what we can do about it, right? And in that post and conversation on Substack, you mentioned using this now, next, later, or never roadmap to keep things manageable. Could you walk us through how that works in practice?
Sure. So the idea behind the now, next, later roadmap, and then sometimes with never added on, came from Jana Bastow. She's the CEO and founder of ProdPlan, which is strangely enough, it's a product management road mapping software. But the premise behind it is instead of roadmaps where you're, which technically wouldn't be roadmaps, they'd be more like release plans where you kind of have things split out by quarters because everyone wants to know when are we going to get it. The idea here is that you want to just kind of group things together based on roughly when you're going to attack them. So just like you size items in relative size, this is more looking at things relative time-wise. So the now category this is the stuff the team is actively working on right now that we're building and we're attacking those things. The next are the items that this is what we're intending to get to next when there's space open up in the now column. The later stuff is these are things that we might potentially do down the road, but there's no saying that just because it's in later doesn't mean it's actually going to happen. And then I have found the never column can be helpful by basically being very explicit about these are things we're not going to do at all. We're just intentionally saying this is something that's really not intended for what we're doing right now. Now, the nature of what these things are is they're bigger efforts. You're not going to be putting like any bugs that pop up on your roadmap. That's something for later. This is really an idea of kind of just giving a bigger overall view of what your intended work is. Ideally, these things are more stressed in terms of outcomes or problems you're going to solve more so than specifically features you're going to deliver. So we're going to tackle how we're going to do X. Next is kind of the thing that you have it at. You don't always get there right away. So sometimes it might be features you're going to deliver or bigger chunks of work that you're wanting to do. So for as an example, I was working on rebuilding an existing pricing application for an agriculture company. And so we went through and kind of got an idea what the process was that we were doing, the data and the rules and all that. And then we split out the work to identify how we were going to attack it. In the major areas of functionality of that tool, we kind of created in a now, next, later roadmap, just to kind of keep track of where things were at.
Yeah, that makes sense. But there was something I wanted to understand better. So when you talked about the now, I thought you were going to say category, but you call it column. So let's dive into that a little bit more. What does that mean, right? Like you talk about having the now column, the next column, the later column. Are we talking about Kanban style, Kanban board style columns? Is there a limit to the size or the number of items in each column? How do you implement this in practice?
So if you think about now, next, later, it's kind of a reverse Kanban board. So the now column, and I got to make sure I'm doing this right. The now column would be over to your left. So it's the leftmost column that you got. And then you go over to the right for things that are going further out in time, as opposed to Kanban, which is switched the other way around. You can or may not have a limit, although if you really think about what the now column is, so these are, like I said, these are things the team is actively working on. So and for me, when I say that, it's thinking of that's the point where we actually bother to split it down into smaller bits and where the team is doing active development work on it. And that's kind of what my criteria are for things to fit into the now column. Other teams might have a little bit different ways of doing it. And that's basically, especially since we're talking about keeping the backlog manageable, that's one of the ways to do that is you're not really creating more refined backlog items until you get stuff popping into that now column.
And the other aspect, if I understand you correctly, what you just said is that, the stuff that is in next is not supposed to be broken down any further. These are big items that are outcome style items. So let's tackle those two aspects now, Kent. So you're saying only items in the now column get broken down and all items are described in terms of outcome. So translate that for us. What does that mean in practice?
Both of those are aspirational things and they're guidelines. Sometimes you're going to break from that. And then in some cases, I have started breaking things down as they're getting closer to the top of the next column. If we know we're going to be bringing them in just so that we can keep things running. As far as expressing things in terms of outcome, it's what, it's stating things as like what you're trying to accomplish. So as an example, the thing I'm working on right now, we're working on some websites that sell added services for people that own vehicles. And so one of those might be things such as we want to be able to enable changing prices more easily. So we have a lot of involved calculations with our prices and a lot of attributes that we can change and levers we can pull to make changes in the prices. So the item basically sitting there is how can we make that more flexible? The actual work underneath it is that we're trying to get such that we can change those variables without having to do code deploys. but the actual out or the actual item is listed as making pricing more flexible. That's an
Mhm.
example. Uh,
So when you talk about outcomes, you're talking about something that will be true once the work is done, but not the
right.
list of work items to be done.
Right. And the reason you do that is it gives the team more flexibility to apply their knowledge and figure out what's the best way to solve this based on where things are at right now and based on what we've learned doing previous things. So when teams identify specific features they're going to do or specific solutions they're going to build, and those solutions are identified way early on, what was true when they identified those solutions may no longer be true once they're actually going and implementing that thing. So you're basically saying we want to accomplish this, but we want to make sure we're able to use the most up-to-date picture of where things are at in order to figure out what's the best way to do that.
And the other aspect that is interesting is when do you define that, okay, this needs to be broken down? So, okay, you already told us that, in the next column, there might be things that are getting to the top of that column that you may want to break up
Mhm.
ahead so that the team has some work to refine already. But how about the now column? Do you break down all the items in the now column? Do you break them down as you start working on them? Like, how do you manage? Because we still have the same problem as we had with backlogs, which is that your now column may explode in size as well, right?
Well, and that goes back to your question about limits as far as how many things can be in the column. So it might be that your now column has one thing in it because that's the entire focus of the team. Um, or it might be that there's one thing in it because the team is also incorporating some things that happen, like addressing some production issues that come along, addressing some bugs that pop along, some smaller changes that don't warrant getting listed on the roadmap, but certainly things that we want to tackle. So a and this is one of those things where the team has to kind of just have some a little bit of discipline around it to say we're not going to overload now with a bunch of stuff we're going to work on. Let's use that to provide our focus, which means your next column might be a little bit longer, or yeah, it might be a little bit longer, but really kind of keeping it focused on we're only going to really work on a specific number of things that match the capacity of the team in that now column.
And now, as you describe this, I also imagine that we may use historical data to decide what is in the now versus the next versus the later column, right? Like, for example, if we say that any average item in the next column gets delivered 6 months later, then of course there's no point in overloading the next column because it doesn't fit the now, because then we are going to create a much bigger and exploding list of items also in the next column, right? So this limiting the number of items in each column is actually something that needs to eventually be done for all of the columns in that now, next, later roadmap.
Yeah, and by virtue of the items being expressed as outcomes on the roadmap, you're inherently keeping the number of items that are going to pop up lower. Because one of the other things that contributes to exploding backlogs is um, having a lot of different ways to solve the same problem sometimes might be one of them. And so if you're just saying we want to tackle this problem and just leave it at that for the time being and say we'll dive into more detail on it when we get closer, that inherently prevents backlogs from exploding that way as well. Or if again you're not splitting them out into smaller bits too soon, that helps keep things to a manageable number.
And the other aspect, so that's a great tip, by the way, right? Like the expressing these items in outcomes is already a great way to reduce the risk of explosion in your backlog. But the other aspect I was thinking is, okay, but then how do we move items from one column to the other, right? Because when we think about, for example, the now column is the stuff we're handling now, but
Mhm.
how do we decide to move stuff from next to now or later to next? Is this really just kind of a Kanban queue that has limited size, and when one item comes out, another one pops in? Or how do you manage that in practice?
To a certain extent, it is that. And the other thing with the next and the later and the never columns, those are effectively there for expectation setting. So your particular team might say, you know what, we're going to kind of use the next column to set expectations about within the next 3 months, next 6 months. These are the things we're thinking we're going to work on. And then later is everything after that. Or you may have a narrower or wider time frame, but that's kind of a way for you, for the team to figure out what kind of expectations do we want to set to let people know this is what, right, as of today, this is what we plan on working on next. And things are going to flow. And when I've used this mechanism before, things have gone from later to now, next, and back to later, depending on the situation and what overall things are happening in the environment and what are the problems we think we need to solve, and what we think we need to solve next today may change a couple weeks down the road.
So what you're saying is that items can move columns because it gives stakeholders a much clear set of expectations of what is actually going to happen, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I was considering as you were describing is, okay, but is there like kind of a process, like every month, every 3 months, you review the items, or is this something that happens all the time? And then if it happens all the time, then, how often? Is it once a week or once every 2 weeks or whatever? Like, how do you keep that backlog, assuming the columns have limited size, right? Like limited number of items per column. How do you keep that constantly up to date? Because we certainly don't want to do a now, next, later only once a year, right?
Yes, all those people do. I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the unfortunate reality. Yeah, some people end up doing the now, next, later only once a year.
yeah. So when in a previous gig that I was working on, and where we had was working with a particular business unit, we made it a practice to kind of visit the now, next, later roadmap explicitly, roughly monthly. If you find it useful, you may find that a good activity to do during sprint reviews might be a quick, let's check the now, next, later, let's check the roadmap to see where things are at and if they need to be moved or whatever. That might be too frequent, or it might, so maybe it's every other review or something like that. You kind of have to, I would suggest definitely building a habit around it, but the habit you build really needs to vary depending on your situation. So that with the gig I'm on currently, I kind of make it a point to check it out about roughly monthly. But I might be glancing at it more frequently than that. It just really does vary on the frequency of when new, hey, we ought to do this, come popping into your vision.
Yeah. So I think that you made a great point, which is that if a stakeholder comes up with a great idea, whatever that might be, that we can then translate into outcomes and add to the roadmap, then of course we're going to review the roadmap at that time. That's clear. But there's a lot of, let's call them smaller decisions, maybe that even teams make on their own. And when they don't have that view of what's coming, they may make those decisions which contradict something that is later on in the later or even next column. Right. So I think that one of the things that you said of building the habit of regularly looking at that now, next, later roadmap is actually quite important, because it's one of the goals of having that kind of roadmap is that it makes it much easier for us to visit the expectation of future deliveries than if you would have everything in a very large backlog, right?
Right. Yeah. It provides things, and the best thing about the now, next, later backlog or roadmap is it's much better suited for talking with stakeholders, people outside the team who aren't thinking at the level of detail that backlog items usually end up being at. So in fact, the previous gig that I mentioned, we had the main business unit director that we were working with and building products to enable, had a habit of coming up with all kinds of ideas. Some of them were great, some of them not so much. So whenever he'd come up with those things, we found that it was very helpful to use our roadmap to have discussions about, okay, so you've suggested we had to tackle this thing next. Where does that fit in relative importance compared to these other things that we've lined up to tackle next? And one of the things we always made sure of doing is that we pretty much kept now sacrosanct, meaning if we started working on something, unless there was something that we found that it didn't make sense to continue doing it, we weren't going to necessarily hamper progress on that. And so those discussions were usually, are we switching things between next and later, right? And because once we kick things off, unless there is something that's saying no, this something is extremely important, we really want to make sure that we get that done, right? Finish that
Mhm.
stuff off once it made it to the point of being in now.
And actually, you're making a great point. We need to make sure that the now column is kept uh, to whatever limit we said it was going to be kept, and that it's not constantly being reshuffled, because that would, of course, kind of defeat the purpose of having a now column. But that also highlights how important it is to often revisit the items in each of the columns, because if we never revisit, there's going to be even higher pressure to shuffle the items in those columns. So
Right.
what are some of the triggers that you would say, okay, if these things happen, then we must sit down and look at the now, next, later roadmap and make sure that it's still coherent?
So most of my career has been working with internal products. So it's things we're building to support business processes. There may be customer interaction, maybe not. So things that have always proven it's time to have that discussion is if any new surprise regulations come into being, that we have 60 days to meet this particular regulation. If we're finding that there is, and hopefully our business unit is doing a lot of measurements and keeping track of how things are going. If there's a sudden change in the performance of the process that we say we got to make some changes to fix some issues that we're running into, that might encourage things to change. If there is a new opportunity to introduce a new product, a new service, or revise the process to improve things even better, that might be another reason to shift the order. It's basically what changes are there in business conditions that we need to address, opportunities to exploit or problems to solve that kind of change the overall perspective of what we were doing compared to what we did and when we originally put the plan together.
Yeah. So this talks about two different types of, or actually even three, right? Like ad hoc requests may require us to look at the balance of things in the now, next, later columns and see, does it make sense to take it now? Should we reshuffle something? Then regular cadence of reviews, like,
Mm-hmm.
once every sprint or once every two sprints, looking at it. And then also this kind of larger maybe reset or refocusing that happens as normal course of business, where we might say, hey, our strategy is about to change. We should look at the now, next, later and review that it's still aligned, or if not, then change the items on those columns, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, and some of the things that show up might feel like ad hoc, but might also be described as business changes are, I've been in a few organizations of late where executive leadership is looking at the overall picture of the organization and saying, we got to make some significant changes. And so you have these proclamations coming down from on high. They're completely shifting up what different business units are doing, completely shifting their focus. And in cases like that, you have to be able to react to that pretty quickly, right? So that's another thing that would come into play that says, "Oh, we need to change what we're doing." And then what the nice thing about the roadmap is that things are high enough level, but hopefully everyone kind of knows what the intent is of those things, so you can have the discussion about, okay, so now we're hearing that this is very important. How does that relate to these other things? And we know we can't get all of this done, which it's important to go in those conversations with that explicit mindset that we can't just keep adding stuff in. So what needs to go out from here to satisfy the things that are popping in?
Yeah. And that kind of conversation is so important, right? And we hope that introducing something that, like the now, next, later, triggers and facilitates those conversations, rather than, puts us in antagonistic positions where we can't help each other anymore.
Right.
But before we can get to the now, next, later roadmap, we have to face the reality that many of our teams are already swimming in backlog items.
Yep.
So if you would have to help a team that is in that kind of situation where the backlog is unwieldy and really long and hard to have conversations about, and you wanted to help them move towards this now, next, later style of backlog, where would you start?
I have had the opportunity to because I back in the day I was an agile coach for a while, and so one of the things when I was coming in and starting to work with a new team, depending on how large their backlog was and if they were complaining about how hard it was to manage and everything, I'd look at them with a completely straight face and say, "Well, you should burn the backlog, Control Alt,
That didn't make you
select
many friends, did it?
select all delete," and then I gauged their reaction to that as far as what do we do next. So oftentimes, if they grew very panicked by that suggestion, I would say, well, what you could do, and what I've done before, most tools have this capability, is I would set up a status that doesn't show up on the board display, like removed or something, and say, move everything to that. So you don't have to keep looking at it. And
Well,
then,
I call that the museum, right? Like you can
yes,
go in and look at the artwork, but you don't need to live there.
right. And basically, so you talk through the fact that it's actually okay to remove those items from the backlog, basically because they're not getting done anyway, and you're not fooling anyone to think that they are going to get done. And I basically have that conversation as just as a kind of to level set that says just because it's on the backlog shouldn't mean it's a guarantee that it's going to get done, because in real life it's not, right? And if it does, by the time you get to it, people have probably forgotten they've requested it, and it's not going to have the impact it was originally thought to. So then to go in a little bit more productive manner, it would be just sitting down and saying, what are the big chunks what are the main outcomes, main problems that we're trying to solve, and what's the most important thing? So let's figure that out and then say, what is it that we need to do in order to accomplish that? So it's really to, and there might be some value in looking at those big items, but looking at all the little items. But the trouble is that there's so much there, people get overwhelmed. So it's helpful just to kind of have everyone sit back and say, what are the main problems that we're trying to tackle? And what those look like differs depending on the type of effort you're looking at. So if you're rebuilding an existing system, which for some reason I've had the opportunity to do several times, that's really identifying what are the main areas of functionality that exist in the current system, and which of those still are actually relevant, because a lot of things might have been built just to account for cruft along the way. And in what order do we need to introduce those things in? If you're working with an existing system that you're not replacing, but you're just looking to optimize, that's a discussion about what's the biggest problem we want to tackle right away? What's the optimization that we want to focus on first? And then kind of identify those types of things. If you're building something completely from scratch, it's a matter of what is it ultimately we're trying to accomplish, and what's the smallest amount of work we can do right now to accomplish that, and then move into an optimization mode. So the discussion, the goal there is to, in all cases, is to get to a smaller set of bigger items, and then getting a sequence down to say which do we want to start with. It's also having the tough conversation to say we have to be very clear about what we are going to do, what we're not going to do, and we have to be willing to say we're not going to do that. And if you have to, say we're not going to do that right now, because it's especially in IT focused teams, they've been spending years upon years trying to be heroes and claiming they can get all of this stuff done when everybody knows it's impossible. So it's a matter of changing the discussion to say we're going to just admit right up front that we can't get this all done. And saying that at the beginning of the year is usually probably going to be, there might be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's going to be much better received than getting to November and saying, yeah, all those things we said we were going to do, yeah, we can't get to them. Right.
Well,
So,
talking about having smaller backlog items. Now that you talked about this in November, having the discussion of we couldn't do. In our Substack conversation, you said that your team had at that point just 23 backlog items across 3 brand websites. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, that's pretty lean. I'm used to hundreds and in some cases, even thousands of items on the backlog. So what are the routines you effectively put in place and the guardrails, the practices you've put in place to prevent that backlog from bloating?
So a lot of it is all governed by having a pretty staunch filter as far as what can actually get on the backlog in the first place. And in the thing I'm working on now, fortunately, I have quite a bit of control over that. And my situation is probably a little bit unique because the team that's working on this, they're all part-time contractors. So which is why we can get away with having 23 items on the backlog, because there's just not that much capacity, to get things done. But those 23 items are crossed all the way from I'm refining the item all the way through it's ready to be moved into production and all the stages in between. So that is kind of where it's at. And basically it is saying, I'm trying to be just a little bit ahead of where the team is going to be working on things. Um, Part of it is not feeling the overriding pressure to keep people busy, and it helps because they're part-time, they're working on other things. So it's not like, and you shouldn't have this compulsion anyway, but I know a lot of teams have this compulsion that we got to keep our developers busy 100% of the time, even though that is not a healthy thing to do either. Um, and one of the other things I forgot to mention about why backlogs explode is because for a while there was this advice going out there, the concept of shovel ready backlogs, where you needed to have at least 6 weeks worth of backlog items set up. And even that I think is going too far because things can happen quite rapidly in 6 weeks. And so you flesh these things out, and by the time you get to getting to develop them, conditions have changed, or we made other decisions in other parts of the system that those things are now stale. So I take it to a point to make sure that we don't have a lot of things even getting ready, just so that when we are getting them ready, we can reflect the most recent state of the system that we're building into.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the comment you made on the shovel ready backlogs, because having 6 weeks of work already ready sounds quite reasonable if you look at it from the perspective of keeping the developers busy.
Mhm.
But as soon as you start digging into it, you will find out that, of course, developers are busy because they're now refining backlog items for the next 6 weeks. They're not busy because they're developing anything, right? Like there's also a cost in having 6 weeks worth of work refined and ready to go.
Yes, and again, I think the biggest issue I've run into is they get stale and they expire. So I would say, in many cases, backlog items, especially the ones that are kind of at the level that the team would work on, are probably closer to milk or eggs than fine wine. Right? They don't age very well, and so
They don't age
the
very well, no.
yeah, and being someone that is spending a lot of their time and getting the backlog items ready for the team, I would prefer not to redo work because I made assumptions or based my effort on old information. Another key part of this
Yeah.
is having a good understanding amongst the team as far as what's the right level of information in backlog items for the team to be effective in moving forward, right? It's that balance between not over specking so that the team has some flexibility to develop the solution in the right way possible. But at the other token, not keeping it so vague that they have to continuously ask questions or make up a lot of assumptions, and then they assume incorrectly and kind of go off in a different direction. And the way I approach that is is by having a discussion with the team when I start working with them to say, what do you think's the right level of information for you? What kind of piece of information do you need? And then making a point to adjust on that as we get some experience working through some items. Some teams I've worked with, a very brief description was sufficient. Other teams, they like to have as much information as possible.
And we need to adapt, as you said. That's a
Mm-hmm.
good point. And also, the more information that is needed in order to consider something refined or quote unquote ready, right? But many
Mm-hmm.
teams still have the definition of ready there. The more information you need for an item to be ready to go into development, then of course, the less into the future you should do that work, because otherwise it's not just wasted work, it's also time away from developing the other items that were already refined.
Mm-hmm.
This is, of course, a huge topic. Managing backlogs is a full-time job, right? Product owners spend a lot of their time doing just that, and so do teams, and so do stakeholders. If people want to dive deeper into this topic of managing that backlog, keeping it usable and effective, what is a resource, a video, a blog post, or a book that you could recommend for teams that want to get better at their backlog management?
This is going to be a selfish suggestion, but in my Substack newsletter, Inside Product, I'm actually going through a series of weekly articles right now about that exact topic that are probably going to be pulled into a more consolidated resource here shortly. So I would suggest folks go out and sign up for Inside Product.
Absolutely. We'll put the link to that on the show notes so that people can easily find. And for those of you who haven't checked out Substack yet, please go. There's a lot of great people writing really insightful articles. You can easily follow those that you most connect with and find the most similarity and get sparked and motivated. And of course, we'll put Kent's Substack newsletter, Inside Product. The link will be on the show notes for you to be able to quickly subscribe and follow him there. And Kent, outside Substack, if people want to, reach out, connect, ask a few follow-up questions, where could they go?
So certainly sign up for the newsletter, but also I'm on LinkedIn. That's kind of my social media home of choice right now because of where the others have degraded to. So probably LinkedIn, Kent J. McDonald.
Yeah, absolutely. I will put the LinkedIn page also in the show notes. Kent, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Hey, friend, thank you for staying. Here is all you need to know about the Global Agile Summit. If you've ever suffered or know people who are suffering from agile fatigue, this event is for you. Agile fatigue is that feeling that settles in when we can't really see a light at the end of the tunnel. We get discouraged, especially when conversations revolve around the same old frameworks, the same old buzzwords and theories. We don't feel that energy anymore. Well, the Global Agile Summit is a different kind of event. We're bringing you real-life first-person stories of Agile succeeding out there in the real world that will inspire you to take action and transform the way you work. The Global Agile Summit will happen in Tallinn, Estonia, May 18th, that's the workshop day, and then 19th and 20th, the conference day. And Tallinn, Estonia is one of the most innovative tech hubs in Europe. The Global Agile Summit is hosted together with Latitude 59, which is kind of a citywide celebration of software startups and groundbreaking ideas. And we'll have a shared ticket for you to attend those events as well. So who will be speaking? Well, we've got an incredible lineup of thought leaders in software and Agile. For example, Clinton Keith, the person who literally wrote the book on game development with Scrum and is busy bringing Agile to the world of game development. You must check his session. The very famous and well-known Jürgen Apelo, author of Management 3.0, will be talking and exploring about AI's impact on leadership. We also have Gojko Adzic, who's taking an unconventional look at the product growth with his lizard optimization keynote. Other speakers include, for example, Sven Dietz, who's challenging everything we know about software development by literally ditching contracts and estimates. Can you imagine? His teams deliver software before their competitors are even done with the contract negotiation. How agile is that? But there's more. We'll cover engineering practices in our developer track with talks on, for example, AI-assisted test-driven development, developing products in minutes with a different approach to how we develop, configure, deploy platforms, and much more. We also have a product track where we cover cutting-edge ideas around product discovery, delighting customers with product delight frameworks. We'll have a talk about that. And we also have an agile business track where we will talk about, for example, open strategy, a very agile approach to managing organizations and delivering software faster to clients. faster than you can even write a contract. Literally. I mean, I already told you about Sven Ditz's story. It's amazing. It definitely is a must see. I'm sure you'll be inspired and get a lot of ideas for your own software projects and software delivery. Now, whether you're a business leader, a product innovator, or a developer, you'll definitely find value in our 3 focused tracks. That's Agile Business for those working with businesses and organizations, Agile Product for product managers, product owners, and innovators, and Agile Developer for the builders, making Agile work in practice, the coders, the testers, the designers, the producers, the Scrum Masters, you name it. If you join, you will meet over 200 Agile professionals from all over the world. People who, just like you, want to grow, want to share, and want to learn by challenging the ideas that don't work anymore. At the Global Agile Summit, you'll get new connections, fresh ideas, and the energy to take your own Agile to the next level. And who knows, maybe even find your next career opportunity. So don't miss out. Check out the full program and grab your ticket now at globalagilesummit.com. I'm really looking forward to seeing you all in Tallinn, Estonia in May. I'll see you there.